Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 20 minutes after 11 o'clock. You know, it's hard to believe we're cranking up for the holiday season.
Yeah.
October 23rd already, right?
I know,
so
it's great.
It's fun, right? Everybody has, but you know, the other part of this is that, you know, people sometimes have strokes and heart issues. I don't know if it's anxiety. I don't know if it's pressure. I don't know what happens there, but you hear about it. Or maybe you hear about it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just that you remember it more because, oh my gosh, it's so bad he had a heart attack in the Christmas season, right? Or
yeah, it's
that
awful.
kind of thing. And I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm just trying to be a radio guy making maybe a simple observation. Dr. Christopher Ellis is on the phone. He's a cardiovascular medicine specialist at the Vanderbilt Heart and Vascular Institute. He's going to talk to us about atrial fibrillation, the signs, symptoms, and causes of that. Good morning, Dr. Ellis. Thank you for being on the show with us today.
Great. Thank you very much, Larry. Good to be on.
So is there a connection between the holidays and heart attacks or heart problems, or is that just a myth because we are maybe more shaken up when it's supposed to be a happy time?
There's certainly a condition called holiday heart, and some folks maybe could go into atrial fibrillation, for example, during that time of year because of excessive alcohol intake. Maybe a little more. That second or third glass of wine could get you. Maybe heavier foods in terms of just more carbohydrates, sugars, rich desserts, and that type of thing. There's not really a seasonality to AFib and stroke particularly, but we know alcohol is a risk factor, so that's probably an important link.
So I'd be wrong to say that I could define what atrial fibrillation is. I probably don't even know how to begin to tell somebody else what it is. How do you tell a layperson what it is, a patient, for example, that's been diagnosed with it?
Real basically, you know, your heart rhythm should be in a clear, regular pattern, kind of like a metronome, just beating all day long. It may speed up and slow down a little bit with activity, but when your top chamber in the heart, the atria, go into atrial fibrillation, it's kind of like if you were listening to this radio station and I just knocked it back a couple of notches on the dial, like you just lose reception. People are unclear. It's like losing reception on your television, and there's just a disorganized pattern of electrical activity that the top chamber of the heart is really wiggling around ineffectively, and blood can kind of pool up in little areas, cause clots, and potentially issues like you had mentioned of stroke or heart attack.
Can you feel the heart,
Yeah.
the increase or the decrease of the beats itself? Does your body feel stranger?
A lot of patients have subtle symptoms. You may feel, really, some people can have rapid racing heartbeats and get really short of breath, lightheaded, dizzy, pass out, that kind of thing, and then they present an AFib. Some patients seem to be completely, have no symptoms when they present. But there's a large spectrum. I mean, things as subtle as, your memory is just a little off, you seem to be going to the bathroom more often, fatigue, certainly feeling wiped out and fatigued seems to be a pretty common symptom from AFib that patients don't realize they're in AFib from that. It's just they just don't feel good. So certainly those general symptoms are something to be aware of that could be from AFib.
So do you need a pacemaker then when you're diagnosed with this?
No, that's probably pretty far down the line for most patients in terms of treatment options. Right up front, if we try to get your heart back into normal rhythm through a variety of methods, then and you feel a lot better, then there's options like heart rhythm medicines. There's procedural treatments to try to fix the AFib that are very effective early on, right when you go out of rhythm. And then a pacemaker is an option if your heart rate is doing crazy things like going super slow when you come out of AFib, a lot of patients may end up needing a pacemaker to help keep their heart moving in between when they transition from AFib back to normal rhythm.
Does let's say pressure cause it, or let me just give you an example. Let's say you go to Thanksgiving and the kids want to play football, so you say, "Oh, I can do that. I did that when I was young," and now the kids are jumping on top of you. Could that happen to somebody who's maybe older or maybe even younger?
Yeah, I mean, overexertion can be a trigger for AFib. For sure, there's some really well-known risk factors, or being overweight, having sleep apnea that's untreated. That's an important factor, and it may be more likely in the winter. I don't know, if the environment in your home, you get a little more stuffy and you're kind of clogging up your airway more when you're asleep. It may put some more patients into AFib. Stress and anxiety are a factor too.
Do you prescribe stents?
Stents for AFib?
Yes.
Usually not. That's mainly for more of a plumbing issue, like an artery blockage feeding the heart muscle. For AFib, probably the first thing that we would prescribe would be looking at the patient's overall health. We'd think about, should they be on a blood thinner or not, because the most detrimental thing that can happen from AFib would be a stroke. And usually the way it happens, it's a pretty severe stroke. It's usually disabling. So
it usually blood thinners are not recommended for strokes. So how do we know? Like, because you hear one PSA that says, take a baby aspirin every day, and then you hear something like this, and you wonder if it's a good idea without seeing a doctor. I mean.
Yep. So the reason people with AFib have a stroke, typically that there's a blood clot that forms in a very specific part of the heart muscle called the left atrial appendage. And we hadn't really figured that out till about 15 or 20 years ago, but at least going back to the 1970s and 80s, there was clinical trials comparing aspirin to regular blood thinners like Coumadin or warfarin, and the warfarin was saving lives, and people were having less strokes, and so it became the standard for most people.
Really?
That, for years, for decades, we had basically Coumadin as our best stroke prevention option.
If a person is diagnosed with atrial fibrillation, do they have it for the rest of their life?
That's a great question. Yes, it's generally progressive for the most part. Once you start having AFib, it sort of initiates episodes that start getting more frequent, lasting a little bit longer, maybe a little bit more symptomatic, that over time tends to get worse for at least half of patients. There are some situations where a short episode of AFib may not mean that you're going to have it the rest of your life as a big issue, but most people, AFib is never going to just go away on its own.
So I'm asking my next question. I don't even know what I'm asking here, but only because the words sound the same. A defibrillator. What does that do? And does that have anything to do with AFib?
So defibrillation basically means shooting an electric bolt through the heart to try to stop it and let the normal rhythm come back in, which it almost always does. And you can get a defibrillator that's like in an ambulance or in a gym, like an AED. All of those are technically defibrillators. They just are put on the skin, on the surface of the skin, to provide you the ability to shock the heart, for instance, out of AFib. A defibrillator that a lot of people think of more as like a pacemaker is a device for people with pretty bad heart failure that's designed to shock you out of ventricular fibrillation, and that's a slightly different scenario. God. Most people, when we talk about defib and AFib, it's because we're trying to shock you out of AFib and get you back into normal rhythm.
Gotcha. Okay. Way more information than we even have time for, obviously. So let's give the listeners a way to learn more. Is there a website?
Sure, absolutely. One thing that would be good to look up, if you have AFib and you've been prescribed a blood thinner or are thinking about a blood thinner or having difficulties with it, a recent survey from WatchUsNow.com actually did a Harris poll on patients and has some interesting patient-centered questions that address your risk of bleeding and other options that you might have if blood thinners are not going to be your thing.
Okay. Dr. Christopher R. Ellis, thank you, sir. Thank you for what you're doing and for being able to be on the show with us for a little while today.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Shop, sample, and share the fun at Orlando's favorite event for women, the Southern Women's Show, October 25th through 28th at the Orange County Convention Center. Discover hundreds of boutiques filled with the latest fashions and trends, jewelry, gourmet treats, health and beauty, and so much more. Meet Savannah Chrisley from Chrisley Knows Best on Saturday. See actor and best-selling author Keegan Allen on Sunday. And watch your firefighters heat up the stage. Visit SouthernWomenShow.com for details. Discount tickets at Walgreens.
Live on stage at the Ocala Civic Theater, Born Yesterday.
Crooked businessman Harry Brock made his fortune on junkyards and a lack of scruples during World War II. In the fall of '46, he's in Washington, D.C. to bribe government bigwigs into shady deals. Harry has brought along quite an entourage. His showgirl mistress, his perpetual inebriated attorney, and his yes-man cousin who keeps the drinks filled and the payoffs coming. Go see Born Yesterday at the Ocala Civic Theater from October 18th to November 11th. Call them for tickets. 352-236-2274.
AccuSleep offers a safe and effective medical